Hey everybody, SciStrikeling here, and welcome to my first photography tutorial video. We're going to start out with some basic subjects in this first video, and move on through different, more complex subjects later on. Photography is a passion of mine, and I want to empower people to make the right choice for them when it comes to choosing a camera to fit their needs. From cell phones to professional style cameras to action cams, people are taking pictures of everything and everyone. A lot of people are intimidated by the choices available and aren't sure what they're even paying for. Today I want to talk to you about a very basic subject, yet one that's very important when looking to get into your first camera. Which camera should you choose? A point-and-shoot camera or an interchangeable lens camera? Why not just use your cell phone? Today we'll discuss these things. First, let me start off by explaining what these types of cameras are. A point-and-shoot camera is a camera with a fixed lens, meaning it can't be taken off the camera or switched out with a different one. An interchangeable lens camera is the opposite. It's a camera that you can remove the lens from and change it out with others to suit your needs. Most of the time, interchangeable lens cameras are sold with a lens, but you can also buy most of them as body only, meaning just the camera, no lens included. This is a good option if you already have lenses to fit the camera, but you're upgrading the body itself. Under the umbrella of interchangeable lens cameras, there are two types of digital interchangeable lens cameras, and these are DSLR, or digital single lens reflex cameras, and mirrorless cameras. We'll get into the specifics of both types in a future video. Some common point-and-shoot cameras you'll see are the ones like the Canon SX540, the Sony RX100 Mark VII, and the Nikon P900. Point-and-shoot cameras will range in price anywhere from approximately $100 US all the way up to $1,000 plus US. So why are you paying so much for some and so little for others? We'll discuss that in just a moment here, but first, what are some popular interchangeable lens cameras? Some of the most popular interchangeable lens cameras are ones such as the Nikon D3200, the Canon Rebel T7, and the Sony A6100. Some of the higher-end interchangeable lens cameras are ones such as the Nikon Z7, the Canon 5D Mark IV, and the Sony A9. These will all range in price from approximately $400 US upwards of $3,500 plus US. While there is an overlap in price between point-and-shoot cameras and interchangeable lens cameras, there's some overlaps in some of the specifications of them as well. Let's take a look at some of the pros and cons for both point-and-shoot cameras and interchangeable lens cameras. First up, we have the pros and cons of point-and-shoot cameras. These cameras are smaller, more lightweight, more portable, and generally easier to use than interchangeable lens cameras. On the other hand, they are somewhat limited on what they can do. Most only have an LCD screen to see what your camera sees versus having a viewfinder eyepiece at the top of the camera. They tend to have smaller sensors, and their quality is not usually as good. There are some exceptions to both lists here, but these pros and cons hold true for most point-and-shoot cameras. We also have the pros and cons of interchangeable lens cameras. For most of these cameras, they have a larger sensor, more selections, and flexibility when it comes to camera bodies and lens combinations, and will also have an actual viewfinder in addition to the LCD screen. This is going to be great for when it's too bright outside or you get a really bad glare on the screen and you still need to be able to see what you're doing. Some of the cons are that they're generally larger and heavier than point-and-shoot cameras. Most are much more expensive, and they have a larger learning curve when it comes to different settings and features and how to get the shot you're looking for. As with point-and-shoot cameras, there are some exceptions to these lists, but these things are true for most interchangeable lens cameras. So now that we know what point-and-shoot cameras are and what interchangeable lens cameras are, let's delve into some of the specs of some of our popular cameras. Also in this section, when talking about the specifications, we're not going to include megapixels. Megapixels are going to be important when you're looking to print your pictures, but most of these cameras are going to have a range of anywhere between 20 to 24 megapixels, with the exception of a few with upwards of 40 to 60 megapixels. However, they aren't going to change anything here that we're going to talk about, and they shouldn't be at the forefront of your mind when looking to choose a camera. Let's first take a look at sensor sizes to get a better understanding of how these different sensor sizes in these cameras compare to each other. On the far upper left, we have a full frame, or 35mm sensor. This is the standard sensor size and is used in higher-end interchangeable lens cameras. Its larger size allows for more light to hit it, as well as to give it a more detailed image because it has more room. Next, we have the APS-C, or crop sensor. Here you'll see that the blue area is smaller than the gray area, where the gray area is actually the same size as the full frame sensor, so you can get a comparison of the APS-C or crop sensor compared to a full frame sensor. So it definitely is smaller. This is what's used in most entry-level interchangeable lens cameras. They're going to be like our Nikon D3200 and our Canon Rebel T7. From there we go on to our smaller 1-inch sensor, and then we get into some of the smaller sensors that are used by our cell phones. As you can see, the blue area in all of those is the size of the sensor compared to that full frame sensor. The smaller the sensor, the less light is able to hit it, and the less detailed your image will be. That's not to say that any of these are bad or wrong, they're just different, and it really depends on your needs. With that being said, let's take a look at some of the specifications of common cameras. First, we'll start with the Canon PowerShot SX540. This is a point-and-shoot camera whose price goes for approximately $260 US. It has a 50 times optical zoom. While we know that a 50 times optical zoom gives you a large zoom range, what does that number actually mean? It represents the range of zoom from the widest focal length of 4.3 millimeters to the narrowest focal length, or the farthest away you can see, of 215 millimeters. When you multiply your 4.3 millimeters times 50, you get your 215 millimeters. What these equate to is the smaller the number, the wider field of view and less magnification of your subject. The higher the number, the narrower field of view and higher magnification. The average human eye can see the equivalent of 30 to 50 millimeters on a full frame sensor, so anything more than that is going to bring your subject closer in view, and anything less than that will give you a wider field of view than you could normally see with your bare eye. Let's take a look at our next specification, the lens aperture. On this camera, the aperture has a range from f-stop of 3.4 to 6.5. And what does this number mean? This number is the measurement from the edge of the aperture to the edge of the lens. What this means is that a smaller number means a wider, more open aperture, and a larger number means a smaller, narrower, less open aperture. The lower the number, the wider it's open and the more light you let in. On lenses with a zoom range, this number means that from as wide as the lens can go at 4.3 millimeters, the lowest the aperture can go is 3.4. When you're all the way zoomed in at 250 millimeter, the lowest that aperture number can be set is going to be 6.5. On most lenses with a zoom range, you will also have a range of apertures, but that doesn't always hold true. On some more expensive lenses that have a zoom range, you will have a fixed aperture, or a single number. This means that all the way through the zoom range, the aperture can be set down to that same number. We already talked about the focal length of this particular camera when we talked about optical zoom. That's going to be your 4.3 to 215 millimeters. We also have a few other specs on this camera, including the maximum ISO of 3200 and the fact that it does full HD video, not 4K video. The ISO is your camera's sensor's sensitivity to light. The higher that number, the more sensitive your camera can be to light. However, the higher that number, the more graininess or noise you'll get in your picture. On this particular camera, the highest that number can go is 3200. On higher end interchangeable lens cameras, that number can go much higher, over 100,000. So next, let's take a look at the specs on our other cameras that we have. The next one we're going to take a look at is another point-and-shoot camera. That's our Sony RX100 Mark VII. Now this is a higher end point-and-shoot camera. You're looking at spending about $1,200 US dollars here. And again, this camera has a fixed lens. You cannot change it out. With this camera, you're only getting an 8.3 times optical zoom. Your focal length only goes from 24 millimeters to 200 millimeters. So while you're not going to have nearly as much zoom range on this camera as you would on the Canon, there's benefits to this camera that the Canon doesn't have. So on this specific camera, your lens aperture can be set as low as 2.8 up to 4.5. And what that means is that lower f-stop number of 2.8 is going to give you a much better low light quality, as well as give you a much more detailed picture. The maximum ISO on a camera like this is 12,800, and this camera also shoots in 4K video. So while this camera is more expensive than the other point and shoot that we've looked at, the Canon, has less zoom, it has other benefits like that lower aperture number. So if low light or a more detailed image is something that's important to you, this is a better option to choose from. We'll also take a look at an interchangeable lens camera. This is the mirrorless Nikon Z7. This one in particular comes with a lens, the 24 to 70 millimeter. But again, you can buy this as body only if you wanted to have an upgrade to the body when you already have lenses. This specific lens that comes with this camera only has a 2.9 optical zoom from that 24 to 70 range. So again, it doesn't have a very high zoom range, but it's a good lens to have for everyday use when you're just out and about shooting, or you're at a friend or family member's house, or anything of that nature. The aperture on this lens is a fixed aperture. So all the way through the zoom range of 24 to 70 millimeters, you can set that aperture down to f-stop of 4. Has a maximum ISO of 102,400, and it shoots in 4K video. So this camera is a great camera because it has really good features right out of the box, and the ability to upgrade those lenses in the future for different types of photography, whether it's landscape or macro or wildlife. You can change out that lens to fit all those different needs. While we're at it, let's also take a look at some of the most popular cell phone cameras. Because let's face it, everybody nowadays, for the most part, uses a smartphone to take pictures. Our 3 most popular smartphones for taking pictures are the Apple iPhone 11 Pro, the Google Pixel 4, and the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra. These 3 cameras have the best cameras on them in the market right now. They mostly have either 2 or 3 lenses. They're going to be an ultra wide, a wide, and a telephoto. For the most part though, the telephoto still does not have that much of a zoom range. On the iPhone and the Google Pixel 4, you're only looking at a 2 times optical zoom out of their telephoto zoom lenses. With the Galaxy S20 Ultra, you're looking at a 10 times optical zoom, and that one is the exception to the rule on the zoom level of these phones. You'll see though on these that the aperture can be set much lower than on most of the lenses that you'll get out of any camera, whether it be a point and shoot or an interchangeable lens. So again, these phones all take fantastic pictures. They have really great low light quality, but for the most part you're limited on your zoom range, and also you're limited by the storage space on your phone. So now that we've kind of looked at some of the basics here and kind of got an idea of what differences there are between point and shoot cameras and interchangeable lens cameras, which one should you choose? Now if you already use a smartphone and you want something that's going to be better than that, I don't recommend a point and shoot camera. You're not really going to get one that's going to be better and give you many more options. Your best bet would be to start out with an interchangeable lens camera. With that, you could always start out with an entry level like a Nikon D3200 or a Canon Rebel T7. The nice thing about that is, even though the camera itself might not be the greatest, the lenses that you can purchase to use in the future are going to be significantly better than anything you would get on your smartphone. They also give you more flexibility, so you can kind of dive in at a cheaper price with the entry-level camera and then upgrade in the future to kind of give you those better options if you decide to stick with photography. For people that don't use a smartphone to take pictures, those are the people I recommend point and shoot cameras to, especially the lower end entry-level ones. They're great because they're light and portable, they're easy to take with you, and super easy to use. Now, if you already use a smartphone to take pictures and you still want to go with a point and shoot camera, that's when I would recommend one of those higher end point and shoot cameras like the Sony RX100. Something like that is going to give you similar quality to what you're going to get on your smartphone and maybe even slightly better zoom range. those are the different options that we have available to us. Again, we're not really going to get into today the differences between DSLR and mirrorless, but I just wanted to give you an introduction into what kind of camera to choose. Because before we get into any kind of tips and tricks and different ways to do different kinds of photography, you need a camera. And whether that's shooting with your cell phone, a point and shoot, a GoPro, or an interchangeable lens camera, knowing which camera to choose is going to help you out significantly. That's about all I have for you today. Make sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to get those notifications of when the next video comes out. Again, this is only the first video in a series of videos about photography tutorials. Don't forget to hit that like button, and also comment below if you have any questions or any comments for me or any tips on how I can make these videos better for you. Thanks everybody for coming, and have a great day.